you very much. Michael Schur. All right. We've taken our masks off.
That's right.
I'm delighted to be here. I want to get one thing just out of the way very quickly. I know I look like shit, so don't judge me. As soon as I walked in and I saw Michael and he looked so good and sharp, and then I went, oh, right. I'm in my pandemic outfit, not my 92nd Street Y. So I've walked into a room with older Jewish people who are now going to turn and go, hey, you couldn't judge me. I mean, we drove all the way out here. We're risking our lives to some extent.
The 92nd Street Y outfit is just a different color sweatshirt.
You know, it is true. I want to obviously say that my wife did not see me leave the house. And if she had, clearly there would have been a different outcome. But I am delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be talking with Michael Schur. I've known Michael for many years. I've always been so impressed, not just with his ability as a writer. I don't know if you know this, comedy writers are not known for their love of man and their thoughtfulness and their kindness and their empathy. Michael is a rare case of a comedy writer who rose to great success and is also an exemplary human, as you see from his work on as many shows. I want to start with The Good Place, because that show was such an exceptional work of premise. You know, there's a lot of shows that go, hey, we'll do an office comedy. But The Good Place had such aspirational premise to it. You wanted to look at the moral and ethical questions that we all grapple with, and your thought was, you know, a great place to do that, the same place they show The Bachelor.
I think I could argue that there's no greater laboratory for ethical questioning than The Bachelor, though. Like that might be a better investigation of moral philosophy than The Good Place. I had the idea to do the show in part because when Parks and Recreation ended, NBC said you can do whatever you want. We'll give you a free play, and we'll guarantee a season on the air. That was at the time a very rare thing. Now it's much more common. But when they said that, I thought like, well, I had been writing some variation of Goofballs in an Office for a decade. And I felt like, well, I could do that again, I think, or I could try some variation of it. But I had this idea, and I thought, like, well, I kind of owe it to like the concept of ideas to try. Right. If I'm getting a free get out of jail free card, then I kind of owe it to the concept of big swings, to take a big swing. And so this was the thing that was rattling around in my head, and I thought it was maybe a tough sell, but if you get Ted Danson and Kristen Bell to do your show, then you can do whatever you want. So
apparently you could do whatever you want anyway. They gave you the free pass.
Yeah, fair enough. It's the only rule that I've ever had for myself at all in any of this is like, try to do something you think is interesting. And right. If it fails, it fails. And if it succeeds, it succeeds. So that idea was what I thought was interesting, and I gave it a shot.
So then the question becomes, why was that an interesting idea for you in that moment? Because it's built around, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's built around the premise of what makes a good person, a worthy person, somebody who would, in metaphysical sense, get to heaven or be sent to hell. And why was that rattling around in your head? And had you killed someone?
It was rattling around in my head because I feel like I play a game in my life where I see good or bad behavior, and I essentially play God. And I go like, I've told this story many times. I apologize if you've heard it, but one of the starting points was like, I was in traffic in LA, because you're always in traffic in LA, and a guy in a Lamborghini pulled into the breakdown lane and just...
May I? If you're here tonight, fuck you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's right. He's not. He definitely died in a fiery car wreck, by the way. So he just zipped past everybody, and I did a thing I do a lot, which I was like, you just lost 20 points. Like, I would play that game with myself of like, that's a negative 20, man, what you just did. Like, I don't know if anyone's keeping track, but if they are, you lost 20 points. Like, it's a video game. I observed behavior and assigned points like it was a video game. And then after like this 700th time that a guy in a Lamborghini did that, I was like, well, maybe there's a show there. Maybe like, what if that is the way it's being? What if we are playing a video game essentially, and someone actually is keeping track? Like, and the people on the top on the scoreboard leaders get up, and then everyone else. So that was at a plot level. That was the beginning. I feel like I'm a rules dork. I always have been. I follow rules, and if a door says, do not exit, if the building is on fire, I'll be like, I can't, it says don't exit.
I'm going to die.
Yeah, like I'd rather burn to a crisp than break a rule, essentially. So those things coalesced into that show.
But even what strikes me about it, and what I think is so infused in your work, and what I find so charming about it is, even the essence of that has a gentility to it that I think most of us would not express. You know, I play a very similar game, and when people cut me off, I don't subtract 20 points from them.
What do you do?
I wish their death. I mean, in my mind, like, my show is called Instant Karma. And when they go through and they do that, you're just watching, and you just sit in the car, you just see just a hint of blood, and then just. But so even the idea that you had the reserve to start to think about it along that way made you a really good avatar for creating the levels of that show. Because a show like that's driven by premise, and I can say this, and for those of you who don't know, like, trying to establish the rules of the road for a universe is one of the most difficult tasks that a writer's room can accomplish.
Yeah, TV pilots, by and large, are very bad. It's very rare that the pilot of a comedy show is the best episode of a show, and that's in part because you're just trying to, as quickly as you can, explain who the hell these people are and what they're doing, and what you end up with is a bunch of lines of dialogue where people say things like, but John, you were the best man at my wedding. We've known each other for 15 years. So please hand me that water. Like you get all this really stilted dialogue because you just need to like explain stuff. So that one of the biggest problems for that show was we had to do that kind of stuff, but we were in the afterlife, and it was like there were not just rules for who the people were and how they related to each other, but massive, gigantic science fiction type rules. And
that's the part that I thought, boy, when I first saw, because I always admire a show with aspiration, and ambition, and I know how difficult it is to pull off character development that isn't caricature. You know, where you just have, we used to do that on Larry Sanders, where we had this great character, Hank Kingsley, but it's sort of an out. Like, when you're stuck on a plot, you just go like, what if Hank walks in and calls everyone cocksuckers?
Or you would do this thing. You would do this thing on that show that I always loved, which was if there had to be an emotional scene where people were talking about something seriously, the bit was always that Hank had just been a sketch where he was playing a lobster, and he would come in a lobster costume and go like, my mother just died.
Yes.
And it was always funny.
And he would always find moments in it that the writers would never find, where in that moment he would deliver his somber line and then take off his hoop earrings, you know, in a very somber way. But that's why I thought, boy, that's a high wire act to do that with characters. How did you create the rules of the road for heaven and for hell? Did you develop the game first and then populate your universe? Or did you populate your universe and let them play it out a little bit to develop the rules of
No, I developed all the rules first. Like I figured out exactly how the system worked, what it would mean if you got into the good place. Also, by the way, I guess spoiler alert. I don't know if you're even supposed to say that anymore. It's been around for 5 years. If you haven't seen it, so there's also a huge twist at the end of the first season, where have you not?
Stop right there. I'm halfway through.
So we not only had to figure out the rules for what the universe were, but then also make them fit with what the actual real rules were that were happening, right? Where it's like the whole thing that you are watching for the first season turns out not to be the thing you thought you were watching. So we had 6 rules that we put up on the board in our writer's room of like what every episode had to do. It started with it has to be funny. I mean, it's a half-hour comedy.
Is that a rule you still have to tell comedy writers?
Yeah. Yes, it is, John. You thought you were being a wise ass, but it actually is. There's a lot of comedies that don't seem to follow that rule.
Understood.
They tend to win a lot of trophies.
I understand.
Then it was like, is it funny? It were questions we asked ourselves. Is it funny? Is it saying something about ethics? And because that was the mission of the show. Mm-hmm. I don't remember all of them offhand, but one of them was, is it consistent with the long game? Because we knew we had this giant twist coming at the end, and we had to make sure the way that the world works now. Like if you got to the end of The Usual Suspects, again, spoiler alert, I guess. If you got to the end of The Usual Suspects and when you were like, oh my God, that's who Kaiser Soze was, but then you thought back and were like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense because he was here and he would have had to have been here. The whole thing falls apart. So we had to make sure that no matter what we did, like for example, one example, the big twist at the end of the first season of The Good Place, spoiler alert, is that it's not The Good Place, it's The Bad Place. This whole thing has been essentially the play No Exit by Sartre. Where they're trapped in hell, and it was a designed hell where they were meant to torture each other.
By the way, most TV is.
So basically, all of the people, Ted Danson's character and all of the other people besides the 4 people who were being tortured are actors who are playing these roles, right? So we had to make sure that we could never have a scene where Ted Danson and anyone who wasn't one of the 4 people were alone together. Because if they were, they'd be going, isn't this so great? Like, we're torturing these people. Like, you couldn't see them alone. So if you go back and watch it, Ted is never in a scene without one of the other 4 people in the scene with him, because otherwise he wouldn't be acting that way. So it was a ton of work, but it was so fun. It was really like, I loved working on The Office. I loved working on Parks and Rec and Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Those shows were so fun. Those ensembles were so great. The actors are so great. The Good Place added this new thing that felt like it was like a strenuous workout in the best possible way, where we had to constantly like jump over obstacles and maneuver pieces around the chessboard in a way that I had never had to do before. And it was great. It was so fun.
And I think for viewers, it was infused with that delight. Like you could almost feel the joy of the creation of it, because there's a degree of difficulty to that show that as a viewer, not even as a viewer who is, who has written on narrative shows or has done stand-up or done anything, but you experience kind of the pleasure of what you imagine the meeting was before you set up the shrimp cocktail boat. Whatever it was that you did there. Yeah. Just felt joyful.
Honestly, part of that joy is just Ted Danson in a bow tie. Like Ted Danson in a colorful bow tie is the most joyful creature on earth, and Kristen Bell and William Harper and Darcy Carden, like the cast, who, by the way, the only Ted and Kristen knew about the twist. We did the entire first season, and we kept everybody else in the dark, which is, for a show about
ethics. Oh my God, you're a method writer.
Yeah, for a show about ethics, it's one of the most unethical things I've ever done in my life. Like I lied constantly to everybody in the cast because I didn't want them to think like, how do I play this, right? Like as long as they thought they were in heaven, they would play everything exactly the way that they should. So I just lied to them. And then around the read through for like the 10th or 11th episode, I was like, all right, guys, everyone gather around. I have something to tell you.
Oh my God.
Kristen took a video of it, of their reaction when we told them, and it's wonderful. And I think it's on her Twitter somewhere. You can find it on the internet, but it's truly delightful. I found out later that at least 2 of them thought they were being fired. Because I was like, everyone, I have to talk to you about something. And they were like, oh, well, all right, this has been fun.
I think that's how they should now talk about firing, is you don't fire people, you just say, actually, you're in the bad place.
There's a twist in your career.
There's a twist in your employment.
In your employment here at Arthur Anderson Consulting.
That's right. Turns out you're not here.
You're not here at Wells
You're
Fargo.
not here at Goldman Sachs. You're in the bad place, which may be synonymous.
Yeah.
I don't know. So that led you to, you're spending all this time, and I imagine like anything that's deliciously premise heavy, there probably comes a point where you realize, when an idea is in that sweet spot of inspiration and execution, you know it. You've been doing it long enough and you feel that. When you have that alchemy of an idea, you feel the energy of a room light up.
Yeah.
And that carries you through all these manifestations. But there is always that moment where you get to that one corner and go, when was that for you in that, or did that never occur? And were you able to parachute out before you hit that moment?
Unique on every show I've worked on, it never happened at The Good Place.
Really?
Yeah, and it never happened in part because when I sold the show, I was aware that it was a kind of a tough sell for a network, and I thought, I can't pitch this until I know what the entire thing is. Mm-hmm. Not just, usually when you pitch a TV show, you're pitching the basic plot of the pilot, the characters, their relationships. You might give a couple other examples of episodes. I thought, like, I can't do this unless I can explain to them how the whole season is going to go. They bought a season. They have the right to know what this whole season is because... So my mentor, Greg Daniels, adapted The Office, created King of the Hill, a bunch of things. He's a true master of the art form. His theory was always, and remains, that what makes a good TV show is a boring setting. Because his theory is you build the drabbest setting, and the characters are the ones who step forward and become interesting and colorful. So literally, The Office, the most boring setting in the world. Not just a fluorescent lit cubicle farm, but a paper company in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Like, there's no more boring setting for a show. And so and he has a lot of aphorisms and theories, and he used to say that what happens when you have a high premise pilot is that it gets picked up by the network because it's like a movie. It's like this huge, like this amazing, exciting premise. And then after 3 or 4 episodes, the premise burns off, and what you're left with is like, what are we doing now? Like, what happens now? So I was like, God, that's so smart. Everything I ever do in my whole life is going to follow that theory. And then I found myself saying, they're dead, they're in the afterlife. There's a demon who's tricking them, and it's based on a piece of French existentialist literature. Like, it was the craziest thing. So I really was like, I don't want to even pitch this until I know the whole season. So before I went in, I knew the whole first season. I pitched them the whole first season. I didn't pitch them the twist because I was afraid they would try to talk me out of it. So I was like, I'm going to pitch all the way to the end, stop, and then when we're shooting it, then I'll tell them, and if they tell me not to do it, I'll be like, I'm sorry, it's too late. They didn't, though. They were fine with it. They gently asked what would happen next, and by that point I could tell them, and so it all was fine. But since we were a year ahead going into the first season, by the time we started season 2, we had a bunch of season 2 conceived of and thought of, and by the time we started shooting season 2, we had all of season 2 broken. So we were so far ahead. The reason you get into those corners that you're talking about is because there just isn't time. It's like running. David Mamet has a great quote about, someone asked him the difference between writing TV and writing movies. And he said, writing a movie is like running a marathon as fast as you can. And writing a TV show is like running as fast as you can until you die. those corners that you're talking about
Right.
happen because you're at a dead sprint. You're on episode 18 of 22.
Yes.
You realize you've written yourself into a corner and you just are like, oh no, like there's no way out. And you stay at work until 5 a.m. and everyone's miserable
Yes.
and nobody sees their families for a week and you barely figure out a little escape hatch and you hope that it doesn't get you canceled. We never were in that situation because we were always so far ahead.
Right. Or you work on a TV show like that and don't care enough.
Yeah, yes.
And then you just do 26 and go, bye.
Yeah, like these are, that's a C+.
That's right.
Go ahead.
I'm so glad that you said the reason that you run into those corners is because you run out of time. Not the reason you run into those corners is you're really just not a good enough fighter.
You're
because
bad
it
at
is,
your
there
job.
is. And I can remember, and maybe you can talk about this because network television really is, in America, it's a very different experience than anywhere else. Everywhere else, the idea will generally dictate the cadence. Whereas on American television, the real estate dictates the cadence. You're going to be on, and we need 24 of these every year. And I can remember when we did Sanders on HBO, Seinfeld taped right across the lot. So we were in the Radford lot at CBS. So we would do our 11 episodes over, the bespoke artiste. Like our episodes had turmeric in them. Like Seinfeld, they're doing 26 every year.
Yeah.
But the weird thing was they were so on it and they knew so much that you'd go over there and they were so happy. And but our set was torture. We're on episode 10, we have one more episode. Fill the refrigerator with salmon, we're gonna need brain food. Have you found different shows brought that kind of hand-wringing or that it flowed more gently? Like was Brooklyn Nine-Nine different from The Office in the sense of how the cadence that you were creating them with, because it's network, so you have to make a ton of them, and the ease at which the machine you built was able to accomplish it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's night and day different now than it was when I started. When I started at The Office, so The Office, we got 6 episodes the first season because no one thought it was a good idea. We barely hung on. The only reason the show even got picked up for season 2 was Carell did 40-Year-Old Virgin between seasons, and suddenly NBC was like, well, this guy's a movie star now. We might as well let him do this sad, depressing comedy that we ordered.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah, and so that was literally the only, and the only other reason was that Kevin Riley, who was running NBC at the time, basically put his career on the line for the show, which executives never do. The guy who was running NBC was like, I believe in this show, and talked NBC out of canceling it, and basically said like please, and it was his job on the line.
Right.
So we got 6 more. And Greg convinced them to say it was 13 more. It wasn't, it was 6, but he was like, 6 is too depressing. Just please say it's 13, I don't care. Just say it's 13. So they gave us 6 more, and then the ratings started going up, and then and our joke at the time was that we were being picked up like act by act. Like they would air like the first 8 minutes of the 8th episode, and they go like, yeah, all right, run the second act. And the next 8 minutes, like, fine. And then it took off, and for a million other reasons. And so in the 3rd and 4th season, they were like, remember how we ordered 6 of these? We now want 30. And including 4 hour-long episodes that would count as 2 each. And we want an hour-long Christmas episode, and we want an hour-long finale. And so this thing that we had been doing in that tiny bespoke way, where we had been spending a month and a half on every episode, suddenly we were running as fast as we could until we died. And that was wild. That was a truly insane experience. Other shows have had, I've worked on shows that are 6 episodes in a season, 13, 18, 24. Like, it's a little bit like the goldfish expands to the size of the bowl it's in.
Right.
Like the writing staff will just, if you say you have to do 24, we do 24. If you get to 13, you do 13. You just you roll with the punches. Now it's extremely rare that any show does what Seinfeld used to, or Cheers. You go back and look at Cheers on Netflix, they did like 34 episodes a year. It's insane.
Right.
So now we're all living a little bit more in that bespoke world, and you can take your time a little more, which is great.
Well, it used to be, the economic model of network TV used to be that the seed money that they would spend on pilots and everything, there was a thing called pilot season, and you would all, it's when all the comics in New York would migrate west. You would always know when pilot season was, because stand-up New York was just one guy. Everybody else was gone. But they would need to do, the magic number was 100 episodes. If you could get to 100 episodes, you could go into syndication, and then they could make their money back. And I guess that's no longer.
Doesn't exist. Yeah.
Right.
Doesn't exist. And in part it doesn't exist because now, after one season, Netflix or Amazon or somebody comes along and just pays them right away. Like it used to, you needed 100, it's so old-timey, like you needed 100 episodes because they would air them 5 nights a week on Channel 11 or Channel 9 or whatever. And if they figured 5 nights a week, 20 weeks, and then we start over. If it's shorter than 20 weeks, people are gonna be like, hey, I just saw this. So 100 was just this arbitrary number of that's how many you needed.
You could cycle through.
But now, again, night and day. Now it's like 50 is incredible. Like we did 53 or 54, I think, of The Good Place. That's like a long run now. Like that was a huge number of episodes for a show on network TV. And, again, Cheers did 300, I think, or something. The Friends did 280, it's bananas.
Here's a slice of trivia. What show did Jon Stewart watch every night when The Daily Show was on? Seinfeld. But every night at 11 o'clock, the Daily Show would be on, and I would know well enough not to turn that off. Because I'd seen it that day and wasn't impressed. And so I would watch, and my wife and I would sit, and we would watch Seinfeld every night, and we cycled through.
Now, I don't know everything about you, but you are a Jewish man who lives in New York City. Wasn't it legally required that you watch Seinfeld every night? So watching Seinfeld at 11 o'clock was our vaccine pass. If you wanted to eat in restaurants, you also, whenever you walked in, if you wanted to get food in a restaurant, you had to go boom, 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 boom. And then they would let you in. Obviously, today they would ask you what the plot was of the episode that you
saw. And everything would remind you of everything. So you move back, and you create all this. Here's what's tough. I want to ask you so many technical questions about, how does the cadence change the way you view your creative process, all that. But I also want to get into just this idea of immersing yourself in morality and ethics.
Yeah.
And also living in Los Angeles. It's one of those things like when Madonna took up the Kabbalah. Do you know what I mean? Just like, I've been living this life, and now I need to put a red piece of yarn on my wrist to remind me that other people exist. Like, what was it? Because everybody who, I swore I would never move to Los Angeles, and I never did. When I worked on Sanders, I would only go out there for 2 weeks. I would stay in a shitty, those Westwood apartments that are made for child stars, and live there and fly back. And I never lived there. But did living there challenge you in a way that brought more of this to bear, morality and ethics? And what you saw around you, was it one of those I live in Sodom and Gomorrah and I'm going to need a road map out?
It's possible, I suppose. Look, Hollywood, I think, a little bit gets a bad rap when it comes to unethical behavior.
Disagree.
Okay. Not because people are actually very ethical, but because everyone is famous. So when unethical behavior is unearthed, it's a very famous person that you recognize. And again, if Brad Pitt does something crazy.
Oh my God, what did he do? What do you know, Michael?
He did not. Brad Pitt's fine. Brad Pitt didn't do anything. I don't even want to use a real example, but if someone
But you did, Michael, you did. You used Brad Pitt. And now we're all on the edge of our seats.
The video will be released later tonight. It's a doozy. I don't know if everyone saw this. The latest fun thing that hit the internet was this Merrill Lynch employee in Connecticut, maybe, who was in like a smoothie joint. He used some racist language and he hurled a smoothie at the like teenage employee who made it for him.
Let me, in my defense, when you order the berry blast,
and
you expect a blast
what
of
you
berries.
get is you get a mango surprise. So it was on. I barely looked at it because it's the thing that we all see now. 5 times a week. If that had been Brad Pitt, no one in this room wouldn't know about it, right? Like everybody, it would be the biggest story in the world. And so, while there is an enormous amount of horrifying unethical behavior in Hollywood, it is also magnified because people are famous and rich and powerful and not a random guy in
That's
Connecticut.
interesting. Yeah.
So I don't know if living in LA heightened this for me or made it more present in my life. I think I was always kind of interested in this stuff.
Right.
And then it did dovetail with me entering an industry where very recently the entire industry went through an enormous reckoning with the way that we treat each other and the way that people in power have treated each other. And I don't think that is what led to The Good Place or this book or anything, but it was very interesting to live through a time where suddenly that's all that, it had never mattered, and suddenly it was all that mattered. And that was very interesting.
Did you feel that shift? Because my sense of Hollywood was always, and again, I come from it from an angle of the arrogance of an East Coast New Yorker. New York, a haven of ethics and morality. We would never. In Los Angeles, they don't even say hello, they say, what are you working on? At least in New York, they say, how you doing, even though they don't give a shit. But I think for me, it was the sense of whenever I was there, I think it was the corruption of a one-horse town.
Yeah.
That the currency of Los Angeles is so narrowly defined.
Yeah.
That it allows a really perverse culture to rise up because control of that one, it's Chinatown. The control of the water rights is you're everything in that town.
Yeah. That's certainly true. Like it is not. I mean, my wife and I are raising 2 kids in Los Angeles, in the middle of Hollywood, and
Have you started them on heroin yet? My wife and I have found it to be incredibly helpful.
Really? Just with like their sleep, for example,
definitely bedtime.
Yeah.
How old are the
They're 13 and 11, and all we talk about is whether we are dooming them to a miserable existence, right? Because there is the value system of Hollywood is not great. It is not, the things that it truly values are a little bit screwed up, and you can fight that to some degree in your parenting, but also they're surrounded they go to school, and it's, by the way, that's something that New York and LA have in common. Like at elite private schools, you're going to experience you're going to interact with a level of status and wealth that is. That I know where you grew up. I grew up in a very middle class town in suburban Connecticut. I didn't have any understanding of any of this stuff when I was growing up, and they don't know that they don't understand how weird it is that they go to school with the kids whose parents have these jobs. They just it's going to be weird when they get to college and realize that not everyone works for Netflix. It's a very weird
Everyone
thing.
will work for Netflix.
Fair enough. That was a bad example.
That's not. That is going to happen.
At that point, yeah. So I'm fine. So it'll all even out, and then it'll be fine.
How much of the work that you've done in morality and ethics plays into your role as a parent, and how much of that has, because I think we all face that sense of, You know, I look at my wife and I and the way we were raised, and I think we both look at each other like, I don't know how we're alive. But I think we still, though, feel like we have no margin of error when it comes to, it's I think why parenting is so fraught is you feel more crucial to their development than maybe you are. You sort of feel like, I've got to make these moves and I can't fuck up because that's going to send them off. Meanwhile, like they haven't listened to us in 6 years. It's really their friend group.
But that's the thing, you don't know, right? It's hard to understand to what degree what you're doing and teaching them is.
Oh my God, are we being sent to the bad place?
I don't know.
All right.
I don't know the answer to that question. Was the thing I was going to say, that I don't know what it's doing. I know that my kids are extremely eye-rolly whenever I say, Aristotle has a theory. They're like, that doesn't work. So, to whatever extent.
You know what you've got to do? You've got to do a Disney or Nickelodeon version of The Good Place.
Interesting.
Where it's eye-rolly teens going, you don't know Aristotle. And then they'll be like, Aristotle's so cool.
Aristotle. I'm going to be the annoying teacher who's like, hey kids, you know who the first real rapper was? Is Socrates or whatever. He was the original hip hop star.
That may be my favorite thing that I've heard in a while. That'll be awesome. Do you guys discuss that? Do you guys discuss moral and ethical strategies for the kids, or is this something that's more a pursuit? It doesn't have the same practical application that you think. It's still at this point more of a thought experiment.
It's more of that, and it's also like a lot of most of the stuff we're talking about is grown-up stuff. It's not. It's like it's decisions that make more sense, I think, when you're a grown-up or at least an 18-year-old adult. The last thing in this book, the end of the book, is a letter I write to my kids, where I'm like, I know you're bored. I know you're sick of me talking about this stuff, but let me explain why I think it matters, why I think it's important, and this can be like a little thing you can flip back to someday and read why I wrote this book and why I think it matters. So I'm hoping they'll never read this. There's never that ship has sailed, but I'm hoping that they read that part because it has their names in it, and they'll be like, ooh.
I immediately just went to the place where I'm like, I'm a bad father. The only note I wrote to them was, put in your Invisaligns. I spent a good deal of money on your Invisaligns. Put them in! I know the rubber bands are difficult. Put in the Invisaligns. What are you thinking? I think that's lovely. Does it start with the phrase spoiler alert?
It should have.
All right, so the reason that the lovely woman came on stage is we have questions from the audience. And I have them.
They're the audience, they know.
So, that's a good point. The questions that you had, now, we didn't have you write them. We just looked at you and thought, I bet that's what she'd asked. So I'm going to read some of those because we are getting to the point where our night.
Again, they know all this. You can just go ahead and read them.
I'm overcompensating. I have not been out much. So I'm explaining things, over-explaining, more because I don't want to be sent back home.
Oh, you're doing this. You're like, let's draw this out as long as we can.
I mean, when was the last time you heard the laughter of people? And here's what's fucked up, and I say this with all due respect. This is such a Faustian bargain for comedians because it's the sense of like, okay, you can come out and you can entertain people, but you will not be able to see them smile. Like, it's such a weird, dystopian, you know what I mean? This is what a comedy club would look like in the bad place.
In your hell, yeah.
And comedians would do their show and come back and go, Did you see those eye crinkles? I was killing it out there. All right. So this question, now it doesn't say who they're from, but for the most part. Which character from The Good Place do you relate to from their ethical perspective? And how did your team decide on Jason's character and to use him to advance the discussion of moral philosophy? Somebody's trying to get a college paper passed.
I think it's a good question.
Columbia.
Well, don't make fun of that.
No, it's a great question.
People who create shows, I think, to some extent, or I'll speak for myself, what you end up doing, people often ask me, which character did you most identify with on a show that you worked on? And the truth is that what you do is you divide your personality into distinct parts and you put one part into each character. So like on Parks and Recreation, a lot of me was Leslie Knope. I want to be optimistic. I believe that government can do good things for people. But there's like 8% of me that's Ron Swanson, and it's like, don't talk to me. I don't want to hang out with you. I want to move to a cabin and be by myself and read a book about old sailing ships. And so
I'm going to say 2%. You're giving yourself a lot more Swanson than I've.
Yeah, well, he's certainly a lot manlier than I am. But I really did that on The Good Place. I think the personalities of the main characters were, I'm a little bit Eleanor. I can be a little trashy and kind of selfish sometimes. I'm definitely some Cheaty. I get paralyzed by indecision and I freak out when I feel like I'm about to make the wrong decision. I'm certainly not immune to the status obsession of Tahani, and I'm a very trashy football fan. And Jason Mendoza, the way that he loved the Jacksonville Jaguars.
I got to tell you, the Blake Bortles shit. I don't know did you ever hear from Blake? Did Blake Bortles ever just call you up and go, "What the hell"?
So, yes. The answer is yes.
Yes. Really?
Yeah. So.
Wow.
Very briefly,
Wow.
So in a way, very briefly, the character Jason Mendoza was a huge Jacksonville Jaguars fan, and Joe Mandy, one of the writers, made him constantly say the name Blake Bortles, who was the quarterback at the time. A lot of people, they had a deep playoff run one year, and a lot of people in America realized for the first time that he was a real person. They were like, oh, I didn't know Blake Bortles was a real guy. Yeah. So the Jaguars public relations people went bananas for this. There was a character on TV talking about their terrible team that no one likes and name checking their quarterback. And so one day, a large package of stuff arrived in our office, and it was a bunch of signed footballs and jerseys from Blake Bortles.
Oh my God.
Amazing. So we were so happy. It was just the best. And so then I was talking to this woman who worked for the Jaguars, and I was like, that is so cool that he did that. Like, it makes me so happy because we're kind of making fun of him all the time and saying his team sucks and kind of saying he sucks. And I'm so happy that he gets the joke. And she was like, well, I wouldn't say he gets the joke. And what became clear was that he had never heard of the show, didn't care about the show. Someone was like, can you just sign a bunch of stuff and we're gonna send it to... And he was like, all right, and did it. And he, to this day, I'm sure has no idea that he was ever mentioned 38 times on a network TV show.
Oh, that was one of my favorite jokes on running there. But the Jason character is an interesting one because I always viewed it as kind of, Peter Sellers-ish. Like there's a certain, there was such a sweetness to it, but it's such an effective character because so much can be projected onto him.
Yes, he's a little bit of a blank slate.
Right.
We gave all of the characters sort of an Achilles heel that was their individual problem that got them into hell in the first place. And his was always, what we talked about was, it was just impulse control. He was just like a dog. He was like a golden retriever who would just bound around and knock things over. And then you would go, Jason, what are you doing? And he would go, Like he was just sort of blank. And so that is a very relatable problem, I think. I think we all have some impulse control issues that we can work on. But what was so great about Manny in playing the role is that he is the sweetest, nicest person in the world, so that when he would go back to neutral, you just wanted to, I can't stay mad at you. Like whatever he did, he threw a Molotov cocktail at a speedboat. And then at the end of it, you were like, look at him. He's a nice guy.
But it was not. It really did have that. There was like a being there quality where you're like the wise idiot or not idiot. Like you just weren't.
I told him he was born 100 years too late. He would have been the world's greatest silent film actor. He is the most like tranquil and then expressive face in the world. I mean, he's also just a good actor. I'm not saying when he talks he sucks. No, he's a great actor. But he also just has like the most, he has like a rubbery, beautiful face that is.
And transformational.
Yeah.
You know, we were watching, what was the show? It was Nicole Kidman played like a guru.
Yeah.
It's, I want to keep saying White Lotus, but it's.
9 Perfect Strangers.
9 Perfect, I know. And I was probably like 3 episodes in, and my wife kept saying, like, that's the guy from The Good Place. And be like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
And then finally, like, I was like, oh, all right, fine, freeze the credits. No, freeze the credits. I was like, oh, that's the guy from The Good Place.
Yeah. You did to your wife what you just did to these people in the front row. You went, I know.
Yeah, you're probably right. I know. Yeah, that's how it goes. All right, that's that question. All right, here's another one. This is to Michael. Don't test me. Given the way The Good Place ended, do you really think we'd get bored in heaven? I thought that was one of the most interesting things that you sort of, as the thought experiment played out, that idea of an ideal, because utopia is such a part of the mythology of we put in this toil for this thing that's going to be ideal. And to then play that out, I thought that was...
I absolutely think you would get bored in utopia. I think it would happen a lot quicker than we suggested it would. When I first started working on the show, the first thing I did is I read a bunch of conceptions of the afterlife in different religions. And they're fascinating, and they all have some variation of like everything you desire, everything you want, blah, 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 blah. But there's an interesting, like in Hinduism, you know, when you're talking about karma, right? So karma, you start as a bug, and if you're a good bug, then when you're reborn, you're like a bigger bug, and then you become a mouse, and you become a cat. And
How long is the bug phase?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of kinds of bugs. You might be there for a while. But the idea is, you know, you get up to, if you become a human and you become a good human, you achieve nirvana, and you basically become a god. And you hang out with a bunch of other gods in eternal paradise. But then, and this is what I thought was interesting, eventually it's like, okay, you start over and you go back and you become a bug again. And when I read that, I was like, well, that's interesting, because someone figured out, like, in this system that we're developing, like, there's got to be something that comes after this, because if there isn't, you just hang out and like eat good food forever? Like, that can't be it. So that was one of the first things we knew about when we got into the end game of the show. It was like, it can't be that they just get to the good place and hang around. It's got to be that they realize that Todd May, who helped me with this book and was one of the philosophical advisors, wrote a great book called Death. It's a real page turner. Brief story, the number of books that showed up at my house while I was working on the show was essentially endless. And one night I was sitting in bed and I was reading Death, which is a black cover with like a raven on it. And my wife was brushing her teeth and she walked in and she saw me reading the book Death, and she went, "This show's gonna ruin my life, isn't it?" So Todd May wrote this book about why death matters, and it's essentially what he says is that mortality is what gives our lives meaning, because it means like we're only here for some amount of time, and that's why the things we do matter, because there is a limited number of them. And then morality is how we navigate that meaning. Morality is how we figure out which things matter and which things don't. And that was a really kind of eye-opening explanation to me of like, oh right, it doesn't matter whether this is terrestrial or in the afterlife. If things go on forever, everything loses all meaning. And so we knew that had to be the ending. It had to be that they made the choice to leave. eternal paradise.
Right, and it was melancholy,
Yeah.
but there was beauty in it. Is there in philosophy? Is there any sense that, because you said something interesting, which is that mortality gives our lives meaning? Is there anything in philosophy about animals and what gives their lives meaning? I'm just curious because
there's
animals are
Yeah.
sentient, and they're, when you spend time around them, you see them as individuals in a way that maybe you didn't. And I think sometimes you think, we're the only people that know, we're the only species that knows how this story ends, but we're not.
No, there's an enormous amount of writing about animals. In fact, Jeremy Bentham and J.S. Mill, both in 18th, 19th century British philosophers, were big animal rights advocates. Peter Singer, who's arguably the most famous contemporary philosopher, at least contemporary utilitarian philosopher, made his name writing about animal rights. Like, there's an enormous amount of philosophical literature about it.
Is any of that going to be on the test? All right. Oh, I see why it said to Michael. So here's one to Jon.
Oh, interesting. You
What
owe
do you
all
think
these people an apology for the way
You're right.
death
You're
stared
exactly
them.
right. The question is, what do you think about Michael?
All right.
What are your thoughts on the show's ending? And would you do the same? Meaning, would I, if I got...
On your show, I think.
No, on your show.
What do I think about my show's ending?
No, what do I think about your show?
What do you think about my show's ending?
Yeah. I don't know how we ended up in this Abbott Costello loop,
Kind of like it.
but I don't know if we're going to be able to
I'm going
get
to see
out
how
of it.
long we can keep it going.
It's what do I think of the ending? And would I have done the same? I'm assuming, meaning, would I have left and chosen to...
Why don't you answer this question? What did you think about the way the Love Boat ended?
Can I tell you something?
Do you have thoughts on this?
Talk about hell. Anything that ends without Gavin MacLeod getting an Emmy is hell. I just dated the shit out of myself. Even the old Jews are like, come on. All right. For Michael Scott, Leslie Knope, and or Jake Peralta, what is the major moral challenge that they would need to confront to get into the good place? I would think Leslie Knope would be like first ballot. She'd be in like flame.
She would be a good candidate. Yeah. I mean, she was also in politics, and if you're in politics, I don't know if you've ever had the chance to examine the American political system in your own career.
I'm listening.
That would clearly some number of decisions she would have made in her political career would be probably maybe ding her a little bit. I mean, Jake was a New York City cop. That's not the easiest job to have if you're looking for, a smooth ride into heaven, obviously. Like, the number of choices you have to make are multivarious and complex. And who is the other one? Michael Scott? Well, Michael Scott was a buffoon. But I will say this, like, his journey was from a guy who had a million blind spots about his own life, about his...
Right.
He was casually racist and offensive in any number of ways, and did a lot of stupid things. By the time he left that show, he was certainly on a good trajectory, I would say. So
Let me ask you this because this maybe gets to your point system and about morality and ethics. Does distance traveled matter? You were born relatively dutiful. You said you didn't like to break the rules, and I've known you just in... you're one of the few people that I know whose grand success, like, I see you as very much the same person that I knew when you were just a kid at a college. All those wonderful qualities. Do you get more credit for distance traveled in a moral universe?
I mean, the show would say yes. A big part of the show was saying, okay, maybe these people at the moment they died didn't qualify in this stupid system, but look at where they came from, right? Like, Jason Mendoza is a perfect example. Jason Mendoza's upbringing was not great down there in Jacksonville, Florida. He didn't have any good role models. He didn't have the safety and comfort of a good education and a steady job and all that sort of stuff. And then by the time he, had gotten to the end of season 3 of the show, like he had learned a bunch of stuff, and he was a better person. He was a kinder person. He understood the world more. Like the explicit argument of the show is that it should matter. And I write about this in the book too. We are not all running the same race here on Earth, right? The starting points. The phrase is born on third base, thought you hit a triple, and there are people who are decent people who were born on third base, and then there were people who were maybe a little rougher around the edges, but the life that they were born into, through no fault of their own, was presented a million more challenges, and we shouldn't be judging the ethical success of those people in the same way. Like, it's
what
not
about
fair.
people who are born on third base and are still terrible people? And I'm thinking about one family in particular. What about them?
Yeah.
What place do they go? Don't say Palm Beach. From all of your shows, which character do you miss the most? That's an interesting question.
Miss the most, like writing for? Like miss writing for the most, or just like
Michael,
miss?
I don't have follow-ups to this. I don't, there's no footnote, there's not an
I
asterisk.
don't know why I thought you did. It was a weird thing
from
for me to
all of
do.
your shows, which character do you miss the most? I'm assuming they mean it as a metaphor of some sort,
Okay.
not like, oh yeah, Steve Carell.
Right. I think.
Who was the most fun to write?
I mean, it's fun in different ways. I'm sorry, this is like
No.
a tortured answer, but
listen,
I
you're
miss
a philosopher.
I miss Leslie Knope a lot. I miss her. I still see Amy, or when we could see people, I would see Amy, and that makes me feel like she's still around. But that character she and I really bonded over that character in that show and the creation of it. It was very much a joint enterprise. It was like a team effort and all that sort of stuff. That's probably the answer, although, I mean, that's the joy of writing these shows is like, do you have any idea how much fun it was to write jokes for Steve Carell?
Oh, I do.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
do. You knew him.
I do have an idea. It's pretty fucking fun.
Yeah.
Here's the thing though. Do you have any idea how it is to not pay him enough so that he doesn't leave for another person?
That sounds fun.
Network! God! Do you ever look at, when I watch, do you know the show Making It, which it's a show that Amy and Nick do? And I always, in some ways, I viewed it as kind of a spin-off of Parks and Recs.
Yeah.
Because the spirit of Parks and Recs feels so infused in that show, the optimism of it. It's almost like Leslie Knope got Ron Swanson to go to rehab. And once he figured out the Serenity Prayer, like now he sits and they just make
craft
things in a barn.
Yeah, you know what? What's so wonderful about that show is we went through what I think of as a very bad period of time in this country with reality television where the point of it was cruelty.
Yes.
It was, let's get the weirdest people we can find, and we as powerful producers will put them on TV and make them sing songs in like a wizard hat and whatever they're wearing, and we will join hands and laugh at their pain. And I watched 3 seconds of American Idol the first year it was on TV and was like, not for me, and I never watched another minute because it was so
Me neither.
Cool. Yeah. It was very cruel, and there was a lot of that in the world of reality TV.
Right.
And then Amy and Nick are like, what if we do this, but we're nice? And it's such a joy to watch.
But it also works because they're nice.
Yeah.
Like it never feels like a contrivance. It always feels like an extension.
That's who they really are.
Yeah.
Yes. What Nick Offerman, one of my favorite people on earth.
Yeah, lovely.
And one of a truly great performer. The thing he wants to do more than anything else is go into a wood shop and make a bowl for you. Like that's what he wants more than anything.
Yes.
And you can tell that when you watch that show. It's just, he just wants to make bowls.
favorite emailer is Nick Offerman, because there are certain people that will send you emails that it has sort of a Civil War quality to
Yeah.
it, like, my dearest companion.
Greetings
from the heartland.
California. Yeah.
I hear talk of, and it's just like,
Yeah.
they're the best.
When I send him, when we meet, I'll say like, hey, does 3:30 work for you? I'll meet you there. He writes back, bully. Like he uses Theodore Roosevelt's sounds good. That's how he responds.
This next question is a question that if we were not at the 92nd Street Y, I don't know how I would take it.
Okay.
Why are there so many Jewish comedians?
Yeah, that is like...
I have heard this question asked before, anonymously online.
Yeah. Here, in this building, totally fine. Somewhere else, FBI watch list.
That's right. The way I choose to read it in this building is as though it were one of the 4 questions at the Seder. Dearest, let's get the youngest in here. Why on this night are there so many Jewish comedians? I have a theory about the comment, and I think assimilation and otherness is a powerful driver of wanting to entertain. And in some ways, it's sad. There's a sadness in why so many performers are Black and Jewish and gay and Latino, because there's a sense of the default setting of this country is not that. And so we come here with a certain, that you feel like you want to be accepted, and you would like to stay.
I have a theory, too, that's sort of a corollary of that, which
Please.
is most comedy comes from one of 2 basic buckets, pain and suburban boredom. And I am suburban boredom. I would say like Monty Python is suburban boredom.
Sure.
It's like silly names and goofiness. Like, I have no real problems. I'm a middle-class white gentleman in America, and I have no real problems, and I'm bored in the suburbs. So I joke around to stop from being bored, and then everything else is pain. It's otherness or marginalization or something like that. And so, if you can go through the history of great comedians, and you can pretty much divide them into one of those 2 camps.
You know what's interesting? Serial killers, same thing.
Yeah.
All right, what's next?
There's probably nothing to read into there.
I was just saying, pain and boredom. Wait, that sounds like Bundy. All right. Oh, here's one. Okay. Do you reach a point in consciousness, philosophical research, and questioning where things are that is no longer funny, that it loses, that maybe it's the exploration loses its humor?
In relation to philosophy specifically?
Again, I don't have follow-ups.
Well, find the person and ask. No, don't. Read it one more time, I'm sorry.
Do you reach a point, and I'm assuming that's in the journey of consciousness and philosophical research and questioning everything, where it loses, you can't find the humor in it anymore?
I would say that I reached a point in the application of it where it stops being funny. Like, I find a lot of philosophy very funny,
right,
partly because it's so densely written that it's impossible to understand,
right,
and partly because philosophers have a way of being accidentally funny. The most famous philosophical problem that we all know is the trolley problem.
Sure.
The trolley problem is you're on a runaway trolley. There's 5 people. It's going to kill all of them, or you can pull a lever and it veers off and kills one person. That's hilarious. That's a very funny problem. Philippa Foot didn't intend it to be funny. I think it's hilarious.
Right.
And then as it starts, because first of all, why aren't these construction workers paying attention to? They've all got their backs turned, they don't hear the trolley. But then in a very serious way, all of these other very serious people have said like, okay, well, what if you're not pulling a lever? What if there's a large man on a bridge over the tracks and you shove him to his death and he stops the trolley? Is that okay? Also hilarious. So I find that without intending to be funny, a lot of them I think have been very funny. The application of it, I wrote this entire book during the pandemic. There was very little about the pandemic that was funny. All of the theories applied incredibly well to a lot of aspects of the pandemic in a way that made me feel like, man, this whole book could just be about the pandemic. When you're talking about what we owe to each other or how do we treat each other or what our responsibilities are when we leave our house and interact with other people, well, mask wearing and vaccines and every aspect of the day-to-day life became an ethical question. That's not that funny. That is not an enjoyable. I was coming off the high of spending 5 years working with a team of very funny people, finding the humor in this stuff, and then suddenly the world clenched up and it was brutally unfunny and kind of remains so to this day. So I think the actual philosophy is hilarious. I think that the application of it at times, especially in this country, is incredibly sad and gut punchy. And
it's almost the difference between when the observer becomes the participant.
Yeah.
You know, it's so much easier to grab distance, and when you lose that distance, the only thing I would say is, and I think you do this, and I think the book does this well, and I think the show did it well, is there is no more important time than to retain your humanity and your humor than when you become the participant. Because it's when you've been challenged the most. And the example I'll give is, so in The Daily Show, during the Green Revolution in Iran, there was a journalist there named Mazhar Bahari who was very, very smart, funny, and still is. And he did a bit with us. We had sent somebody to Iran, not realizing there was about to be a revolution. And he interviewed Mazhar, and Mazhar was arrested like a week later and put in isolation in Evin prison. And I then made a movie about it, so he wouldn't sue me. No, because he and I became very friendly. But his journey, what allowed him to maintain his humanity as a participant in horror was humor. He felt that it was the highest order of being human. And he valued it to that extent. And so, you know, the thing that I will say to you is, you've crafted something that I think also lives to that ideal, which is, how do you navigate when you're no longer the observer, but when you're the participant in something with great consequence and great horror, and you navigate it with humor? And I feel like that's a tremendous gift that you've done.
Thank you.
I was actually reading that whole thing off a card. All right. What actions do you believe have the greatest point values?
In the good
both
place.
Positive and negative in real life. And I mean, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and go, cannibalism's got to be up there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a super interesting answer other than, you know, the biggies, right? I will say this though, there's a problem in philosophy that I read about a little bit that's called the free rider problem. And once you know what the free rider problem is, you see it everywhere. And the free rider problem is essentially a packed trolley car, everybody paid for their ticket, it's going to some destination. At the last second, a person who didn't pay runs up, hangs on to the outside and gets a free ride. The question is, did that person do anything wrong? And you might say, well, look, everybody got to where they were going. In fact, one extra person got to where they were going. Maybe the net good is maximized that way. But also it's pretty plainly obvious that when a bunch of people do what they're supposed to and then one person doesn't and relies on basically the other people not kicking them off or calling the cops or something, that's not an ideal situation. Once you know about this problem, you start seeing it everywhere. Someone who, off the top of my head, decides not to get a vaccine during a global pandemic and relies on everyone else to get vaccines for their own safety. I'm not going to do this. You all have to do it, and then I will benefit from you all doing it. Someone who doesn't wear a mask when everyone else has to wear a mask. Someone who, during a drought, says, well, if everyone else is going to reduce their water usage, more water for me. I'll water my lawn as much as I want. It's not worse than cannibalism, but in our world, in the modern world in which we live, I find that kind of hypocrisy or whatever you want to call it to be the most vexing. I find that attitude, and then maybe this is because of the pandemic and it's been so obvious, but I find that action, being a free rider, relying on everyone else to do the right thing so that you don't have to, and you can be as selfish as you want, and you can get a free ride wherever you're going, that is the thing that drives me the craziest in the modern world. So
I agree with all of that, except for the one part about the vaccine, because I've done my own research, and I found that, and this is just something I've done, because because the development.
Now, briefly, how many times have you had COVID so far? It's 7, right? You had 7 different strains?
This is going to baffle people. I had it in grade school.
You're always a precocious
Honestly,
child.
I can't even tell you how many times I drive by the hospital and just ring the bell and be like, "Can I get another booster?" Can you?
You got cut off like you were in a bar.
Can you help?
The hospital had to be like, get this guy, call him an Uber and get him out of here.
Yeah. These morbidities aren't getting any coier. So, snap, snap, fella. Here's a good question.
Barkeep.
Barkeep.
One extra dose of Pfizer, if you will. Thank you.
Moderna enemas all around. Might as well enjoy it. All right. Who is the Scranton Strangler? And why is it Mose?
We all made a pledge never to say. You'll never know. You'll never get the answer.
Was it really a pledge?
No. Gene Stunitzky and Lee Eisenberg, I believe, were the ones who came up with the Scranton Strangler, and I was gone from the show. I actually don't know the answer. I can't tell you because I don't know if they ever even decided internally, but their original idea was that it was Toby. Their original idea was we were going to find out that Paul Lieberstein had been strangling people. Yeah, I thought it was hilarious too. I mean, there is a general idea that you don't want to make one of your main characters a serial killer. It's not great for the show, but it would have
Unless you're on Netflix, and then that's pretty much the premise.
That's all you do, yeah.
That's all you do. And here's our final question for the night, and I also just want to thank all of you for coming out tonight and rejoining Community and giving us all just that really wonderful jolt of adrenaline and laughter and good feelings that I think we've all been sort of craving. And so it's lovely. As a comedian and a talk show host, I'm used to being applauded nearly every day.
I want to say one thing before we wrap this up.
Sure, please.
I got hired by SNL in December of '97, January of '98. But my actual first professional writing job was given to me by Jon Stewart.
That is correct.
Yeah.
He was 9.
I didn't get hired at SNL right away when I went in for an interview in the summer of '97, and Steve Higgins, Jon was writing a book, and Steve Higgins said, "Hey, there's this kid, we're not hiring him, but maybe you have some use for him." And I went to Jon's office. I had no credits. I had no prospects. I had nothing to offer the world, but he sat with me in his office for 3 hours in the Tribeca area of New York City.
Correct.
And he, at the end of this 3 hours of talking to me, said like, well, you seem like a nice kid. And he paid me over the next few months $3,000 to pitch him ideas for this book he was working on called Naked Pictures of Famous People.
Yes.
I pitched him over 4 or 5 months. I pitched him probably 150 ideas.
Yes.
He used 1/3 of one of them, which he changed significantly from my pitch. But that $3,000 paid for my rent in New York City. It paid for me to be able to stay in New York City and eventually get hired at SNL. In many ways, I owe this man my entire career.
Oh, that's crazy.
And
So to give you some perspective on that, when he says I came, I had nothing and no prospects, he was one of the best writers that I had seen at that age, and was in that Josh Lieb, Simon Rich category of like prodigies. So trust me, $3,000 to just know that I was going to hang around with somebody who hopefully one day would create a show that I could act in was one of the better venture capital investments I've ever made in my life. But I appreciate that. But here's our final question. I think it's a good one. How can comedians help our society heal, and how can we start enjoying the same jokes regardless of political identity? And is that something that you ever think about?
I'm not sure what the same jokes means.
I think it means, can we find a group that's so out that even now, generally that's been Jews. I think it's that longing for a camaraderie in society that I'm not sure ever existed. I think it may be one of those things to fuzzy nostalgia, because I don't recall, and I've been in the business 35 years, almost 40 years, ever being a time where Americans were united in their political ideology and what they thought was funny.
No, never happened.
Yeah.
I will say this in terms of like how we get back to normal or whatever.
Right.
I started working at SNL in '98. A couple of years later, my friend Rob Carlock left to go to LA. He was running Weekend Update, and I was asked to run Weekend Update after he left. And I thought, well, sounds fun. Funny, silly news jokes. I can do that. I took the job on like August 25th, 2001. And my first show of funny
Don't spoil it
jokes,
for everybody.
I should have said spoiler alert. I blew it. God damn it. That would have been such a good callback. My first show, my first Weekend Update for funny, silly news jokes was the 9/11 show. And we had a bunch of meetings, and we asked a lot of the same questions that we've all been asking recently because of the pandemic.
Right.
How can we get back to normal? How can we tell jokes? All that sort of stuff. The only thing that we could think of to do was to just do Weekend Update. Just make a bunch of jokes about whatever was in the news. We bring a couple actors on in silly costumes. We put one foot in front of the other, and we trust that this is something that people actually want. The first joke we did on that show, at a moment of frayed nerves and maximum anxiety. By the way, this is also 2 weeks before anthrax was found in our building. We all had to leave again and go through this all again.
Again, in my defense.
So the first joke we told was the CIA now believes that Osama bin Laden is probably hiding out someplace that's very dark and where there are very few people. So they have begun searching theaters showing the movie Glitter. Mariah Carey vehicle, which had come out like 1 week earlier. And it's a pretty good joke. It's not the best joke of all time.
I like it.
Right? But so Jimmy Fallon told that joke, and there was a second's hesitation, and then a like cathartic, rapturous laugh came out of the audience, and it was like, right, that's what we do. We tell dumb jokes about Mariah Carey movies, and whatever is happening in the world, especially at times of national strife and tension and anxiety, the answer when it comes to comedy is you just start doing comedy again. People will go back to comedy clubs and they'll fill up again as they did right after 9/11, and TV shows will come out, and there will be interesting things that happen. Like, for example, Ted Lasso came out in June of the first year of this pandemic, and it was just exactly what America needed and wanted in that moment. And things will change and shift and will evolve like they always do, but like we won't stop wanting funny things, and people will keep doing funny things, and eventually it will never go back to exactly what it was. I think that's good. I don't think it should ever go back to exactly what it was, because it's a constant, endless march of change and progress and everything else. So will it ever be the same? Will we ever enjoy the same jokes? No, I don't think we should. If you go back to an old stand-up set you did from the late 80s, you're not going to want to do any of those jokes anymore. I've seen those jokes.
I wouldn't do those on the road. People pay good money to see you. Why would they want to hear Saddam Hussein stuff? No, I get that.
But the point is that comedy, all of it has an expiration date on it. The minute you tell a joke, a clock starts ticking to the point where that joke will either no longer be funny or will be revealed to be offensive or unpleasant for some group of people.
As things change and
right, and so
grow.
the goal should never be, I think, to do the same jokes. The goal should be to do new, more interesting, better jokes that reflect wherever we are now.
Right. I think that's exactly right, and I really appreciate that. And it's the kind of thing, the other thing I would be curious about your opinion on is how you think the changing values of society should change what comedians do. Because I'm torn, there's a part of me, I don't know if I'm more comedian than man sometimes, where, we've all gotten so relentless in our criticisms of each other, because we're all aware of what we all think now. In a way, Twitter and social media is like, what was the movie, Mel Gibson, he was like a doctor, and he got ESP, and now he could tell what
women want.
What women want. Sorry.
I did not think that movie was going to come up tonight.
Yeah. I bring it up at every, but that's Twitter. That Twitter is, we all now have ESP. And so that you hear shit that when you do a comedy performance, and there's a live performance, or whether you were writing the jokes for SNL, in the audience, an audience is an organism. It's like a Borg. And you can be killing it, but I can always, in an audience, find some people that aren't just aren't having it. Don't like me, don't like the act, don't know why. But now that there's social media, I do know why. Social media is riding home from the show with the people who didn't like it in the back and just going like, fuck. Trying not to let that affect your work.
Yeah.
Or affect what you do. Or affect, we always used to have a joke that it's always funny till it happens to your guy. When you made a joke, we made a joke about a Democrat, and the audience would always go, hey. And he'd be like,
Yeah, sorry, man.
I think that's always going to be the problem with comedy, because they always say laughter is the best medicine. But laughter is also a toxin, because it is, in essence, provocative. It's part of what it does. It's not here to heal you, and it's not here to upset you. It's just here. And so that's, I think, the thing that you grapple with as times change.
Yeah, I would also say, though, that one of the good things about the age we live in
Yes.
is that people who have never been able to express themselves can now express themselves, and that is
Exactly.
And I am on Twitter way too much. I tweet way too often.
Right.
I have at times in my life been like, this is toxic, I'm leaving, goodbye. And then 2 weeks later, I'm like, I have a joke about Paul Ryan and I really need to get it out of my brain. And if I don't, I'm going to explode. And I just go back and I fall back into the old habits. Now, I realized many years ago that the problem isn't Twitter.
Yes.
The problem is me. And so I turned my mentions off, and I don't interact with anybody. I don't respond to anybody. I don't see the things that when people try to troll me or say, you're an idiot or blah, 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 or your shows suck or whatever. I'm sure still happening. I don't see it. Now, that has its own problems. Part of the problem of the echo chamber universe that we live in is we are now we're playing radio stations that only have the music that we want to hear. That has its own pitfalls and dangers. But when it comes to the expression of grievance, I think I would rather live in a world where people who have legitimate grievances get to air them and they get heard. Like, we used to be in a world where neither of those things were true, where people who had legitimate...
Well, people aired them, you just didn't
They aired them alone in their houses.
That's right.
And that is not a good world either. So sometimes when I see people complain about the way that the world works now, I understand it, and I see those gears grinding, and I think at times the pendulum has swung too far in a certain direction in certain ways. I also think I would far rather live in a world where people who have legitimate grievances about structural power, who have been marginalized and have never had a voice, those people have a voice now in any number of different ways. I think it's better, all things being equal.
Right.
It's better.
The democratization of grievance.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And so
I just don't understand, for comedians, when they complain about this idea of cancel culture, whatever those things, which again, that's a whole other conversation but I make my living talking shit. Like, that's what I do. I've done it for a long time. So I would be hard pressed to then complain, to be like, are you talking shit to me? I mean, basically that's what we do. My point is, talking shit, but with grace, I think we all have to realize, like, this is fair game. Like, you can talk about a woke mob that'll come after you for a joke that they think is intemperate to a disadvantaged group, or you can talk about a right-wing mob that's going to come after you because you mentioned that you want to teach about Harriet Tubman. But the truth about the world is, you really want to step in some shit, make fun of BTS. Michael Schur, is there anything that you would like to add tonight? Philosophically speaking, I feel like in terms of ethics and philosophy and writing a book, I would like to, I don't want to put you on the spot for profundity, but is there anything that you would like to leave us with that will change our lives?
I think the essence of the show, The Good Place, and of this book is that what is important ultimately is that you care one way or another whether what you're doing is good or bad. I think the problem with a lot of the people that we see, especially people in power, people who have achieved, who are maybe born on third base, thought they hit a triple, and then retired to their Palm Beach state, is that they don't, not only do they not care at all, they enjoy flaunting the fact that they don't care, right? And the path to improvement, if there is such a thing, begins with a very simple decision, which is, I'm going to decide I care one way or another, whether what I'm doing is good or bad, and that means I'm going to try to be better. Knowing that you are trying means knowing that you will fail. You will blow it all the time. You will step in it. You will make fun of BTS at the wrong moment and have to hide in your house for 3 weeks. You will cause people pain and anguish and suffering when you did not intend to. And when those things happen, the temptation is to not care, because it's like, well, I cared and look what happened. I got punched in the face. And the only real conclusion I've come to in all of this stuff, reading all of this stuff and talking about it for years with all the people I've talked about it with, is that the only thing you can control is whether or not you care. It's whether or not you care if what you're doing is good or bad. You can actually make that decision, and you can actually decide that you're going to try to be good, and you then maybe have a better chance of learning from the mistakes you will inevitably make. And that's the ethos of the show, The Good Place, and that's the ethos of this book that I wrote.
Well, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it. You know, I don't get a chance to talk to you very much because I don't communicate with people. But I've enjoyed this tremendously. I've always been a huge admirer of your work and of you as a person, and I've enjoyed this very much, so much so that I left New Jersey, where the Y, by the way, is a very different organization. The Y where I live has a pool and no Bronfmans. But I've really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see, you know, what's coming next from you. And I think that thing about caring, man, do you feel that in all your work? And that's a compliment of the highest order. So well done.
Thank you, buddy.
All right, so Michael Schur. Now do we put these back on?
Yeah,
And then go, all right.
Are you staying and signing, or that's?
I don't think so, no.